All right, we begin this morning, though, once again with the midterm elections because there are just 5 days to go. And that, of course, means Republicans and Democrats are making an all-out push to get voters to the polls.
In a big pitch to voters, President Biden focused on threats to democracy, trying to convince Americans that Republicans can't be trusted to run the country. The president pointed to the January 6th insurrection and the recent attack on Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. That argument was echoed by former President Obama while campaigning for Democrats in Arizona. But top Republicans are pushing back, seizing on crime and the sluggish economy after the Federal Reserve announced another big hike in interest rates that now hovers above 8%. We have full team coverage of Decision 2022 with NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster in Wisconsin and NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Mark, let's start once again with you. Messaging has been so crucial in the lead up to this election. We just mentioned Democrats are focusing on threats to democracy. Republicans are focused on crime and the economy. These might be issues that their bases care about, but are they getting through to those undecided voters?
Yeah, Joe, that's a great question. And our NBC News poll ends up showing that threats to democracy ranks among the top, if not the top issue among all that's out there in the country. But disproportionately, it is an issue that fires up rank and file Democratic voters and not independents or the persuadable middle. Independents and the persuadable middle, according to our poll, see the economy and cost of living as their top issues. And so there might actually be an important logic for President Biden as well as former President Barack Obama talking about threats to democracy, because they do need to be able to fire up their voters to get them to the polls. But whether or not this is actually going at the persuadable middle and often the voters that end up deciding elections, that remains to be seen.
Mark, we are seeing those big names hitting the campaign trail. That includes former presidents, both Obama and Trump. What's the purpose of these visits right now with just a few days to go? Is it firing up the base and getting them to the polls, or is it still trying to reach some of those undecided voters?
Joe, it's all the above, but mainly it is to go into communities, one, to actually drive local media coverage, to actually have a message to the local voters who are in a particular state. That's one of the reasons why you often end up going to battlegrounds as opposed to giving a speech like President Biden did in Washington, D.C. last night. But the other thing to do is actually get your people encouraged to vote early. And it's not a surprise to me that you ended up having former President Barack Obama in Arizona. Arizona is a very big vote by mail speech and state, and oftentimes you end up having these events coinciding with pleas to your voters. Okay, be sure to mail in those ballots or go into that early vote center. And so these rallies and these events are often done in conjunction with get out the vote operations.
You know, we know how divided the country is along party lines right now, but this year we are seeing evidence of split ticket voting in places like Pennsylvania and Georgia, two battlegrounds. For example, they'll maybe vote for the Republican for governor, but the Democrat in the Senate race. What does that tell you about the state of mind of the American voter?
Yeah, Joe, it tells me that candidates ended up mattering a whole lot. And one of the reasons why we kind of see a gap in the polling in Pennsylvania, for example, where Josh Shapiro, the Democratic nominee for governor, has a wide lead, while John Fetterman is in a really neck-and-neck contest with Mehmet Oz in the Senate contest, is that Shapiro is just seen as a much, much better candidate than Republican Doug Mastriano. Similarly, in the Georgia race, Brian Kemp has kind of started to run away with the gubernatorial election against Stacey Abrams, while we do know that the Senate contest is neck and neck between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock.
And real quickly here, Mark, with 5 days to go, what are you keeping a close eye on?
Everything, Joe. But of course, you know, again, the campaign activity, we are going to see former President Donald Trump rallying in Iowa. You're going to see a big event in the next couple of days with Barack Obama and President Biden in Pennsylvania. And so the states that everyone is focused in on the end, the ones that actually probably will end up determining control of the U.S. Senate, that's what I'm interested in.
No one better to keep an eye on everything than Mark Murray. Mark, thank you so much.
That's definitely true. Also, Shaquille Brewster, if we're keeping an eye on Wisconsin, that's where we find him. Shaq, good morning. So two big races we're watching there. Let's start with the governor's race. Incumbent Democrat Tony Evers is set to hold an event this afternoon in Merrill. One of the major issues that Evers and his Republican challenger Tim Michels have clashed over is election reform bills that are being pushed by Republicans. Right. Tell us exactly what those look like, what's at stake here, and both sides of this issue.
Well, what's at stake is really how elections are administered here in the state of Wisconsin, a battleground state where both candidates and both parties are eyeing for the 2024 presidential election. And Republican Tim Michels calls election integrity his top priority if he is elected governor. Wisconsin is a state where Governor Tony Evers has vetoed more than, or nearly, I should say, 20 election-related bills, restrictions that would block private funding for elections that set up drop boxes, for example, in 2020, or that would limit who and where people can return those absentee ballots, as we see more people using in those absentee ballots and voting early and in-person absentee. So Governor Evers has vetoed much of that legislation. Tim Michels, he says he will pass that legislation. And when asked earlier in the campaign whether or not he would certify the 2024 election, he wouldn't answer. But now he says that he would certify the elections because he would pass those bills, many of them restricting access to the ballot here in the state of Wisconsin. So huge implications based on what happens in this governor's race in just a couple of days.
Shaq, let's also talk about the race for Senate there. Another big one, according to a new Marquette Law poll. Republican incumbent Senator Ron Johnson is ahead of his Democratic opponent, Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, by just 2 points here. And it seems like they're both stepping up personal attacks since their last debate. Walk us through this campaign strategy and tell us how it's resonating with voters, the most important part of this.
Yeah, and, part of the strategy is kind of based on what you see in that polling there. Yes, Ron Johnson has a slight lead, but look, that lead is tighter than it was in October, and it's well within the margin of error. So both campaigns are seeing this as somewhat of a jump ball, and you get a sense because it's that jump ball, because they know it's going to be about turnout, they're stepping up the attacks against one another. Listen to a little bit of those attacks that we've been hearing out on the trail.
And again, he's saying that Wisconsin is institutionalized racism, and we conceal it. Does that sound like very supportive of Wisconsinites? I'm just saying exactly what Mandela Barnes has said. We're using his own words.
This is a person that says a lot of wacky things, to say the least. But what he's doing in Washington is no joke. It's downright dangerous. He's putting lives at risk. He's putting our safety at risk. He's putting our democracy on the line.
Both of those two candidates are out on bus or RV tours. You get a sense it's getting the message out to voters and hoping that they show up.
Shaq, also, we know that there's been tension there over election observers. In fact, the Republican National Committee filed a lawsuit yesterday against Green Bay over this issue. Tell us what's the latest on this.
Well, late yesterday, a circuit judge in Green Bay actually sided with Republicans and ordered that the election officials grant more access to those poll watchers. The RNC was alleging that partisan poll watchers are not able to view the entire process of returning absentee ballots, and specifically the certification of those absentee ballots. In response to the lawsuit, the city officials expanded an area, or essentially created a new area, that poll watchers were able to watch the certification of those ballots. People familiar with the process in Green Bay tell NBC News that there's been some tension between poll watchers and election workers, sometimes involving video and photos of those poll workers. So that tension that we're seeing across the country, we're seeing also here in Wisconsin.
All right, Shaq Brewster there in a state where as of yesterday, over 500,000 people have already voted early in that state. Shaq, thank you so much.
President Biden issued a stark warning for voters about what's at stake this November, saying the future of democracy is on the ballot. In a speech just blocks from the Capitol, the site of the January 6th insurrection, the president warned against candidates who are undermining faith in voting and pushing conspiracies.
There are candidates running for every level of office in America, for governor, Congress, Attorney General, Secretary of State, who won't commit. They will not commit to accepting the results of elections that they're running in. This is a path to chaos in America. It's unprecedented. It's unlawful. And it's un-American. As I've said before, you can't love your country only when you win.
For more, we're joined by NBC News senior digital White House reporter Shannon Pettype. So, Shannon, the president has been hammering this theme in his speeches recently. Of course, he had that big speech on this topic in Philadelphia in September. I think some observers would argue it's the strongest closing argument that he can make right now. So who is he trying to reach with this message? What was notable about the speech?
Well, this isn't necessarily the speech that pollsters and Democratic strategists have been saying they want to hear from the president. What they have been telling us is they want to hear the president and Democrats talking about more about the economy, because that's the #1 issue they're hearing about from voters. But clearly, this is an issue that the president wanted to talk about. There have been concerns about the threat to democracy in his speeches and remarks throughout his presidency, even before he was president. You noted he gave that pretty high-profile speech back in Philadelphia in September on this issue. And one person familiar with the planning told us that there were obviously a number of recent developments that added to the urgency driving the president to give this speech now. And a key one of those was the attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who was attacked in his home recently, as well as growing concerns that some Republicans may not accept the results of the election, and that we could see a revival of a lot of these conspiracy theories in 2020 come again in 2022, something that the president believes continues to risk to undermine the very foundations of democracy that the country are built on.
Although he didn't mention him by name, the current president took aim at the former president, Donald Trump. What did he have to say about Trump?
Yeah, he was very clear here in blaming former President Trump for this rise in election denialism, for the continued spread among Republicans of these debunked conspiracy theories that undermine the 2020 election results. Here's a little bit more of what that president said last night.
American democracy is under attack because the defeated former president of the United States refuses to accept the results of the 2020 election. He refuses to accept the will of the people. He refuses to accept the fact that he lost. He has abused his power and put the loyalty to himself before loyalty to the Constitution. And he's made a big lie an article of faith in the MAGA Republican Party.
So very clearly drawing that link between what the president sees as these threats to democracy and the actions by former President Trump.
You also mentioned the attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. Let's listen to what the president had to say about that.
This institution, this intimidation, this violence against Democrats, Republicans, and nonpartisan officials just doing their jobs are the consequence of lies told for power and profit, lies of conspiracy and malice, lies repeated over and over to generate a cycle of anger, hate, vitriol, and even violence.
Quickly, Shannon, the attack on Pelosi's husband really did shape some of this speech, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was what the president opened his speech with, and some of his most powerful material there. And as much as a call for people to come out and vote for candidates that are supporting democracy, it was a call for an end to political violence and this violent rhetoric that, of course, is increasingly, as the president noted there, becoming an issue as we get closer and closer to these midterm elections.
All right, Shannon, thank you so much. Appreciate it. An NBC News poll shows the economy is top of mind for voters. No surprise there as they cast their ballots.
Yeah, that's right. But what are the specifics around that? What exactly are the economic issues impacting voters? And especially in key battleground states, could that potentially impact their vote? For more on this, let's bring in NBC News business and data reporter Brian Chung. Brian, good morning. Brian, with some new skills, by the way,
Right,
on the big board for us.
And is wearing khakis.
Yeah,
Very thematic, in the theme of.
Exactly. Okay, all right. So we know you're looking at some of these key issues: inflations, housing, jobs. How are voters feeling about those, especially as we just mentioned in those battleground states?
Well, luckily, I've got some fancy data on the touchboard here to show you, again, economics and the midterms, a very big focus of what's going on in this election. And when we talk about what's happening here, as we kind of slowly bring up our slides here, we're getting a little bit of bugs in here.
Pretend you didn't see that.
Exactly. Look, inflation and rent, right? This is a big focus of what Americans are feeling when we talk about 8.2% prices higher than they were a year ago. Again, a lot of that is just the cost of living, rent going up by 7.2%. But the unemployment rate, I want to highlight this here, the labor market looking very good, 3.5%. This is at lows we haven't seen in many, many decades. That's something that nationally is helping the picture. But again, if you have a job, but those earnings are getting eroded by inflation, not necessarily a good thing. And this is a reason why we're seeing the economy and also cost of living ranking among the highest issues among voters.
We should note the big board truly has a mind of its own.
Yes,
it does
it's
whatever it wants to do. It's its own personality.
You're just battling back. It's all good.
We're trying.
As you can see there, we want to take a look at some of the swing states. So what are some of the key issues on voters' minds in those battlegrounds?
Absolutely. Let's give it a shot here as we talk about the three big battle states. Again, these are not the only ones, but these are ones where we're seeing tight races: Wisconsin, Arizona, and also Pennsylvania. And I want to show you one statistic for each one that kind of highlights the differences in what we're seeing here. $5.26. That is the price of a gallon of milk in Wisconsin. That, by the way, is 32% higher than it was a year ago and highlights the food insecurity that's happening. Spoke with a food bank that said they're seeing lines of cars over 100 long in some cases because of the higher prices of food. But in Arizona, it's rent, as we were talking about earlier, up 21% over the last year. By the way, I spoke to someone in the Phoenix area who said that they saw their rent go up by about 40%. So there's a lot going on here as I continue to battle the touchboard here. But then the last one I want to highlight here is Pennsylvania. Interesting to see job postings down by 28%. So again, the unemployment rate picture is still looking okay. But is that story starting to change? We might be seeing signs of that in Pennsylvania. The national average, you wouldn't see this, by the way, because it's down by about 9%. But you're starting to see employers in Pennsylvania start to pull back on the aggressiveness by which they're trying to hire, the expectation being that they might not need all those people as they get to next year. So a very different picture in each of those states, but overall the economy remaining a huge issue for the midterms.
Okay, the board really is doing its own thing.
It's almost Friday.
I'm watching not touch it at all, and it's just like, here you go, here you go. Okay, Brian, I think what you were just talking about is a good segue into this next question, which is we're about to get a jobs report. Of course, it's not just for the state of Pennsylvania, nationally. But how much of an impact does a jobs report have right before a midterm election? Is it something that voters are paying attention to?
Well, it remains to be seen if what you see tomorrow is going to make someone decide to vote for somebody else. But broadly speaking, the expectation is that the jobs report tomorrow won't tell a different story than we've seen overall anyway, because the labor market has continued to chug along. And despite all these concerns, we're still adding jobs at a healthy clip. So the expectation for about 205,000 jobs added in the month of October. Again, that's still adding jobs. So as long as you're not seeing a negative, the story on the labor market and people being able to find and have opportunities out there in the labor market still remains intact.
All right, Brian. You kept that on track.
Yeah, great job.
We'll get
You were talking about the milk, and it was telling us about the rent. Brian, thank you so much. And we'll have you covered on Election Day and night here on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson and Tom Yamas kick off our special live coverage beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night, followed by live results and analysis with Lester Holt, Savannah Guthrie, and the rest of the NBC News team at 8 p.m. Eastern. And, of course, we will have full coverage right here on Morning News Now on election morning as well as the morning after. Now, staying with the economy, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 0.75 of a point yesterday, taking it to its highest level since 2008.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell hinted the central bank could discuss slowing the pace of increases at upcoming meetings, but warned rates could peak at a higher level than expected.
As I've said in the last two press conferences, it will become appropriate to slow the pace of increases as we approach the level of interest rates that will be sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to our 2% goal. There is significant uncertainty around that level of interest rates. Even so, we still have some ways to go. And incoming data since our last meeting suggests that the ultimate level of interest rates will be higher than previously expected.
Here to discuss this and what it means for you is Caleb Silver. He's the editor-in-chief at Investopedia. Caleb, good morning. Good to have you with us. So markets initially jumped on the Fed statement, then fell again during Powell's news conference when he said rates would top out at a higher terminal level. Help us understand what's going on here. What is the Fed saying, and how do you interpret its latest stance?
Yeah, good to be with you as always. And when they're calling the terminal rate, that's where the Fed wants interest rates to be to see inflation come down. That terminal rate's going to be north of 5%. So Fed Chair Powell yesterday saying it was premature to talk about pausing or pivoting and not raising interest rates at the next couple of meetings. And that's what set the market in for a tailspin yesterday. So the terminal rate is going to be north of 5%. Now with that interest rate raise yesterday, we're at 3.75 to 4%. So we still have another at least full percentage point to go before the Fed feels that inflation is going to come down meaningfully, and that's what investors didn't like to hear. But for consumers, that also means everything we borrow, the rates at everything we borrow is going to continue to go up. Mortgages, credit cards, car loans, et cetera.
Yeah, so that's what I want to ask about. I mean, for somebody at home, how does this impact everyday Americans? What does it mean for those, for example, with outstanding debt? As you just said, we've already seen credit card debt soar to pre-pandemic levels. What does this now mean, especially with that hint of what's coming?
Yeah, if you have a variable rate on anything that you're borrowing or paying off, say it's a mortgage, say it's a car loan, then those rates are going to continue to go up. We've already seen it in the mortgage market. We have the 30-year fix now north of 7%. We have credit card APRs now between 18 and 19%. Car loans for new cars, up above 6%. So everything you borrow that's not fixed is going to continue to go up. On the flip side, guys, you're finally getting a little bit of money out of the bank. So you're probably getting some notices from your credit card company or your bank saying, hey, CDs, certificates of deposit, we're now returning between 2 and 3%. So you can make money on your money in the bank. But if you're borrowing money, those rates go up if it's not fixed.
Let's look ahead to tomorrow's jobs report. Generally speaking, the jobs market has been fairly strong recently, which maybe complicates things right now. I mean, how could that affect the Fed's plans going forward?
It's one of those good news for the economy, and the jobs market is kind of bad news for the stock market because the jobs market, Brian alluded to it, is pretty strong. North of 200,000 jobs expected have been added last month. We've had a very steady stream of job gains. They're slowing a little bit. The unemployment rate, 3.5%. That's right where the Fed wants it. That's maximum employment, between 3 and 4% unemployment. That said, if we get a stronger than expected jobs report, that's just going to be more fuel to the fire for the Fed to keep raising rates because as more job gains are added, so are wages continuing to grow. So wage growth puts pressure on companies, and the whole cycle continues round and around until inflation comes down meaningfully. So you have wage inflation, but you also have inflation on the consumer level. We're paying more for everything, rent, loans, et cetera. At the same time, people are still getting work, and wages continue to rise.
All right. Caleb Silver. Caleb, as always, appreciate you.
Especially when it's this complicated. Thanks, Caleb. All right, now let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Michelle Grossman is here. Hello.
Hey there, guys.
Michelle.
Hi. He's such a wealth of knowledge, isn't he?
He really is. Yeah,
he breaks it down
like
for
you.
you.
Yeah. Like you.
That was so nice. I led you into that. So we're looking at that same weather pattern we've been stuck in. Winter-like in the west, a little warm in the east, and then some severe weather in between. I know. We're kind of stuck here, and we're going to be stuck here over the next few days. This is what it looks like on radar right now. You see that snow falling. And again, we're going to be measuring snow in feet in portions of the central and southern Rockies. Winter alerts posted all throughout the Four Corners, up into portions of the Northwest as well. Where you see this blue here, that's a winter storm watch. The white is a winter weather advisory, and the pink is a winter storm warning, and that's where we're going to see the most snow. It's going to be heavy, too. We're going to see the winds blowing, so some blowing snow as we go throughout this Thursday into Friday. Snowfall forecast, where you see these pinks and purples, that's going to be the highest amount. We could see 12, 14 inches, but then we're going to see another system move on shore, so we're going to see 2 feet of snow in some spots. This is the setup here. We have that cold front. It's a powerful one. It's been moving on shore. It's been moving inland. We're going to see another one move on shore later on this week, but we're looking at that heavy snow accumulating in the Rockies. Then we're looking at the chance for severe weather. So this is new, where we see that warm air to the east is going to move into that clash zone in the middle with that cold air behind it. That's where we're going to see the chance for some pretty gusty storms later on tonight into early tomorrow morning. So by tomorrow, that front pushes east with a line of strong storms. Could see some gusty winds, some hail, and then the greatest threat from southern Oklahoma into Texas, even into portions of Arkansas, we could see some heavy storms as well. Heavy rain is going to be a threat as well. We could see some flooding rains from the Great Lakes all the way through the lower Mississippi Valley into portions of the southeast Texas, into the Gulf Coast states. We're looking at some heavy rain. Where you see those brighter colors, that's where we're expecting the heaviest rain, orange, yellows, and also the reds. So it's battle of the seasons. We have that dip to the west. It's called a trough. So we have an area of low pressure that's bringing in that cold Canadian air. That's why we're seeing the snow in some spots, along with the cold front that's bringing the storms. And then we have a big area of high pressure. It's pumping in warm air. It's pumping in warm air off the Gulf, so it's really humid as well. So when you have that clash zone, that's why we're going to get the storms later on today. And then even a bigger threat tomorrow. So that strong front forms at the boundary of the air masses between cold and warm, and that's why we could see some pretty strong storms. And then as we go throughout tomorrow, we're looking at enhanced risk in some spots. This is today. We're looking at yellow, where you see portions of Kansas and Oklahoma, also Texas. That is the likeliest spot of seeing some of those storms. So Dodge City down to Amarillo, even Lubbock, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, some hail. Could see an isolated tornado or two. It's on the lower side, but still it's there. Better chance for that tomorrow. 27 million people at risk. That includes Oklahoma City, Dallas, Waco. So pretty big cities. Outside of that, we have a possibility as well. Little Rock into Shreveport, Houston as well, Lake Charles. And then we're going to stay above average. So temperatures into the upper 70s in some spots near record amounts. Kansas City today, 77 and 75 in Chicago.
Still hot.
Still hot.
Also, see, you are a fount of knowledge.
Right.
I love the explanation of the masses coming together, and that's where we get the storm.
I really love that you guys listen.
Educational, not only telling us
for lunch. What's next?
Oh, no, I love your weather report.
Oh, so nice.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.